The rain hit Deadwater Gulch like the sky had split open, turning the dirt road into a long ribbon of mud. Lightning cracked across the horizon, giving the town a momentary flash of blue-white light, just enough for people inside the saloon to see the outline of a girl staggering toward the doorway. No one moved to help her. No one even opened the door. In a place like Deadwater, suffering was something you watched the way you watched a fight, silently waiting to see who survived. She took 3 more steps, her boots sinking into the mud, and then her body finally gave out. She collapsed against the saloon's front door, her shoulder hitting the wood so softly it was almost a whisper. The door didn't budge. She slid down to the ground, unconscious before her head touched the dirt. But the real hook, the moment no one forgot, was what happened next. Because 10 seconds after she hit the ground, the saloon door opened anyway. Not by anyone inside, but by a man walking out. Jonas Hale filled the doorway like a stone wall. Broad shoulders, rain-soaked coat, silver-streaked beard that looked carved by the mountains themselves. He had come for supplies, nothing more. But the second his eyes fell on the girl lying at his feet, everything in him changed. The rain, the noise, the music inside. None of it seemed to matter any longer. His face tightened with something that wasn't quite shock, and wasn't quite anger either. It was sharper than both. He knelt beside her, one large hand sliding beneath her head. Mud streaked her cheek. Rain plastered her hair to her face, and even in the storm's darkness, he could see the bruises. Not fresh, but not old either. Someone had hurt her. Someone had sent her running. And someone had driven her straight into Deadwater, where no one dared care. Except him. "Easy now," he murmured, though she couldn't hear him. His voice was low, steady, the kind of voice meant to calm skittish horses and frighten people. "You're safe. At least with me." Inside the saloon, a few men peeked over shoulders and around tables, watching the scene with the kind of lazy indifference that came from small-town cruelty. One of them chuckled. Another muttered, "Should have left her there. Strays bring trouble." Jonas didn't even look at them. He lifted the girl into his arms like she weighed nothing. Her head rested against his chest, her breathing shallow and uneven. Each breath made his jaw clench tighter. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he knew enough. She had survived something terrible. She thought collapsing at a saloon door was her last chance. And no one was going to touch her again. Jonas turned toward the darkness outside town, rain beating against him, and carried her away from Deadwater Gulch without a single backward glance. He didn't owe her anything, but starting that moment, he would risk everything. Jonas carried her through the storm as if the weight steadied him rather than slowed him. His boots sank into mud, rainwater running down the brim of his hat, but he didn't adjust his grip once. The town's lamps flickered behind him, fading with every step, and soon the only light came from lightning splitting the sky open in jagged white lines. He walked toward the small cabin he kept near the old creek, far enough from Deadwater to breathe, close enough to return only when necessary. Tonight he was glad he had chosen isolation. The girl in his arms didn't need curious eyes or cruel tongues waiting to feast on her story. Her breathing wavered, a shaky inhale followed by a thin exhale. Twice he thought she might slip under entirely. Each time, he tightened his hold and spoke softly, as though words alone could anchor her to consciousness. "Stay with me. You're almost safe." He didn't know if she could hear him, but something in her brow twitched as if the sound of his voice kept a thread between her and the world. By the time he reached the cabin, the storm was roaring hard enough to shake the treetops. Jonas kicked open the door and stepped inside, the warmth from the fireplace he had left smoldering earlier greeting him like a blessing. He lowered her onto the bed, his bed, because it was the only one with enough blankets, enough softness, enough space to let her rest without fear. She was drenched, trembling, her fingers still curled as if she'd been running when her body gave out. Jonas removed his coat and draped it over her, then knelt beside the bed to get a closer look at her injuries. A bruise darkened her left cheek. Her lip was split. Old scars, faint but visible, traced down one arm like memories someone had carved into her skin. She had survived violence long before tonight. The sight of it pulled something raw and furious from deep inside him, something he rarely let surface. "Who did this to you?" he said quietly, though he didn't expect an answer. But she stirred. Her head shifted, her lashes flickering against her damp skin. Then, barely louder than the crackle of the fire, she whispered a single word. "Please." Not a name, not a threat, not a plea for help. Just fear. Pure, bone-deep fear. Jonas reached out slowly, letting his hand hover so she could pull away if she sensed danger. "You're safe here," he said, keeping his tone steady, gentle. "No one's going to hurt you." Her breathing eased slightly, though she didn't wake. It was enough to tell him one thing. Whoever she was running from, they weren't finished. They weren't far. And they weren't the kind to give up a chase. Jonas rose to his feet, his expression turning cold and sharp as steel. If they came tonight or any night, they'd find someone waiting for them, someone who did not run. The storm faded by dawn, leaving the world washed clean but the cabin heavy with the scent of fear and damp clothes. Jonas had not slept. He sat in the wooden chair beside the bed, elbows on his knees, watching the stranger breathe. Every shallow rise of her chest felt like a negotiation with fate. Outside, the creek murmured softly, mindless of the chaos that had carried her here. Inside, the quiet felt fragile, as if one wrong breath might shatter whatever safety she'd found. When she finally stirred, it was brief. A twitch of her fingers, a shift of her legs. But Jonas sat up straighter, bracing himself. Waking a traumatized person could be as dangerous as waking a trapped animal. He spoke gently, voice low and calm. "You're all right. Don't rush." Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening with sudden, violent terror when she saw the unfamiliar room. She pushed herself back against the headboard with a choked gasp, blankets tumbling down, breath breaking into panicked fragments. Jonas lifted his hands in surrender, staying seated, keeping his distance. "I won't touch you," he said softly. "You collapsed near the saloon. I carried you somewhere safe, that's all." But his calm didn't reach her yet. She scanned the room, walls, windows, the single door, calculating escape paths even though her body trembled too hard to stand. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to disappear into the wood itself. Then, through chattering teeth, she whispered, Are they here?" Jonas frowned. "Who?" She closed her eyes, as if speaking the word might summon them. "Men. 3 of them. They were waiting outside town. They said." Her voice broke, and she shook her head violently. "Please don't let them find me." Jonas leaned back, his expression cooling like iron in winter. 3 men. That narrowed it down. Deadwater had more than its share of drifters and criminals, but only a few hunted women with such persistence. He had seen the type many times. Men who thought fear was ownership and pain was discipline. "They're not here," he assured her. "And they won't be. You're out of sight, out of reach." She looked at him for the first time, really looked, as if measuring the truth behind his words. Something in his face, maybe the steadiness, maybe the quiet certainty, seemed to pull her back from panic. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "You don't know me." Jonas's jaw flexed. "I don't need to know you to stop a beating, or to stop men like that." A single tear slid down her cheek, surprising her as much as it did him. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then whispered, "Evelyn." He nodded once. "Evelyn, you're safe here. And until you can stand on your own feet, I'll make damn sure no one lays a hand on you again." Her shoulders loosened, just a little, but enough to show he'd given her something she hadn't had in a long time, a reason to breathe. Evelyn slept again after their brief conversation, exhaustion dragging her under like a tide that refused to release her. Jonas let her rest, tending to the fire, boiling water, and washing the dried blood from the small cuts on her skin with gentle, deliberate movements. He didn't ask more questions, didn't push. People who had run as far and as desperately as she had didn't open their past easily. They cracked, slowly, like ice breaking in spring. It was afternoon when she woke a second time, her breathing more even, her eyes less clouded by panic. She took in the room carefully, absorbing the details she had missed before. The neat stack of books by the window, the handmade wooden shelves, the hunting rifle mounted high above reach, the simple but tidy living space of a man who lived alone yet refused to live like an animal. Her gaze finally settled on Jonas, who sat at the small table whittling a piece of wood with slow, rhythmic strokes. She swallowed, voice hoarse. "Did you stay here the whole time?" He didn't look up. Didn't figure leaving you alone was a good idea. Her brows pinched, not in suspicion, but in confusion. Most men don't do things like that. Jonas paused the knife mid-stroke. Most men ain't me. Silence settled again. Not uncomfortable, but heavy with things unspoken. Evelyn shifted, wincing at the soreness across her ribs. The movement drew his attention instantly. He set the knife down and approached, stopping at a respectful distance. "You need food," he said. "Soup's ready if you feel steady enough to eat." She hesitated, then nodded. Jonas poured a bowl, brought it over, and placed it on the table beside the bed rather than handing it directly to her. She noticed that, how he kept his hands to himself, how he moved carefully around her as if she were made of glass and wildfire at the same time. She ate slowly, each bite warming her from the inside. Something eased in her face. Not quite trust, but the beginning of it. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and took a long breath. "You're going to ask who I'm running from," she said quietly. "I'll listen," he replied. "Only if you want to talk." For a moment she seemed grateful for that answer. Then her gaze drifted toward the cabin door, as though imagining the world outside it. "My father died last winter," she said. "Left me the ranch. Small, nothing worth fighting over, or so I thought." Her fingers tightened on the blankets. But there were men who believed otherwise. Men who said a woman had no claim. Men who started with threats, then tried force. Jonas's jaw tightened, but he let her continue. "I ran. They followed. And last night, they caught up." Her voice trembled. "If you hadn't found me, they would have dragged me back, not to claim land, not to settle a dispute, but to break her spirit until she stopped resisting." Jonas exhaled slowly, a sound almost too quiet to notice. When he finally spoke, his voice held the weight of iron. "They won't touch you again." Evelyn looked at him, and in her eyes flickered something that looked dangerously close to hope. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that neither Jonas nor Evelyn had planned but both silently accepted. She regained her strength in careful increments. Short steps across the cabin, breathing exercises to ease the panic that hit without warning, quiet moments staring out the small window as if expecting the world to come crashing in at any second. Jonas worked outside during daylight hours, chopping wood, repairing the fence, checking traps along the creek. But he never strayed far, and every time he returned to the cabin, his eyes immediately sought hers, making sure she was still there, still breathing, still safe. Evelyn began to notice the little things about him, the way he hung his hat on the same peg every time, the way he handled tools with deliberate patience, the way he spoke softly even when he was frustrated. He was a man built for solitude, yet he had adjusted his entire world around her presence without complaint. It wasn't kindness out of pity. It was something steadier, something rooted deeper than obligation, that made her chest ache in a way she didn't know how to name. But peace, as always, never lasted long. It was late afternoon when Jonas returned from checking the northern trail, his steps measured, his jaw tight enough to crack stone. Evelyn looked up from the table where she'd been sorting dried herbs Dorothy had once taught her to use. One look at him and the color drained from her face. "What happened?" she whispered. Jonas removed his coat slowly, eyes not leaving hers. "Tracks. 3 sets. Fresh." He paused, letting the weight of that truth settle between them. Men on horseback. They circled near the ridge, then turned toward Deadwater. Her breath hitched. "They found the town. They'll ask around. Someone will point them here." Jonas didn't argue. He didn't offer reassurances he couldn't keep. Instead, he moved to the window and watched the darkening forest, his entire posture shifting into something colder, harder, like a man slipping back into a life he thought he'd buried. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "I need you to tell me everything. Names, what they're after, what they're willing to do." She swallowed. The words tasted like fear and memory. "Their leader is Mason Crow. He claimed my father owed him land. But that's not what he wants." Her voice thinned. "He wants me." The ranch was only an excuse. Jonas closed his eyes briefly, as if steadying himself. When he opened them, there was no softness left, only resolve. "Then he'll have to get through me first." "That's exactly what terrifies me," she whispered. "You don't understand what he's capable of." "And you don't understand what I'm capable of," Jonas replied, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "I've dealt with men like him before, men who think fear is a leash." He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she felt anchored by his presence. "You're not running anymore," he said. "Not alone." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of smoke from town. A sign, a warning, a promise that danger was no longer far behind. Night in the mountains usually brought a kind of peace, a stillness that settled over the world like a heavy blanket. But that evening the silence felt wrong, too tight, too expectant. Even the creek sounded uneasy, its normally gentle rush echoing sharper against the rocks. Evelyn sensed it immediately. Her nerves prickled, her breath shortened, and every shadow inside the cabin seemed darker than it had the night before. Jonas noticed her tension without her saying a word. He had risen from his chair only to check the fire or glance through the window, always returning to sit across from her, his calm presence acting like a barrier between her and the fear she couldn't quite name. When she flinched at the sound of a branch snapping outside, Jonas spoke before panic could take hold. "Animals," he said. "Nothing more." But she shook her head. "You don't understand Mason. He chases things until they break." Jonas studied her quietly, seeing more than she wanted to reveal. Trauma had carved its way into her bones long before she arrived at his cabin. That kind of wound didn't heal in days. "Evelyn," he said softly, "look at me." She did, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "No one is going to break you again. Not while I'm standing." Her lips parted as if she wanted to believe him, but fear still coiled tight in her chest. She pushed up from her chair, pacing slowly, fingers fidgeting with the hem of Jonas's spare shirt she now wore. "They'll come for me. I know them, and they'll hurt you just to prove they can." Jonas rose, moving with a steadiness that contrasted her trembling. "I've lived alone out here for years, not because I couldn't live around people, but because I didn't like who I became when I had to deal with threats." He paused, letting that truth settle. "But for you, I'll become every damn thing they fear." Her breath hitched, a sound caught between relief and despair. She moved toward him, then stopped halfway, guilt flickering across her face. "I brought danger to your doorstep. You didn't ask for this." "No," Jonas agreed. "I didn't. But trouble doesn't ask permission before it arrives. You showed up at my door half dead, terrified, branded by men who think they own whatever they can hold down." His voice lowered, a quiet fury threading through it. "If I turned my back on that, I wouldn't deserve the life I've built out here." Evelyn's knees weakened, and she sank onto the edge of the bed. For the first time since arriving, she let herself cry, silent tears leaking from tired eyes, falling onto her hands. She didn't sob. She didn't shake. She simply let the weight she'd been carrying slip for a breath. Jonas didn't move closer. He didn't reach out. He simply stood nearby, letting her have her grief without intrusion. When she finally lifted her head, her voice trembled but held a new steadiness. Then, if they come, will you stay with me? Jonas met her gaze, and something solid and unbreakable settled in his expression. I'm not going anywhere. Outside, somewhere in the trees, a horse whinnied in the dark. The hunt had already begun. Jonas barely slept that night. He sat in the chair closest to the door, rifle resting across his lap, listening to every creak the cabin made as the wind pressed against the walls. Evelyn slept fitfully, her breaths catching whenever her dreams pulled her back into memories she hadn't outrun yet. Each time she gasped awake, Jonas murmured a reassurance. Wordless, quiet, steady, and she slipped back into uneasy rest. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that moved like restless spirits across the wooden floor. Just after midnight, Jonas's eyes snapped open at a sound he hadn't heard in months. The distant crunch of hooves on frozen ground. He rose silently, moving to the window. The moon spilled faint silver across the clearing, enough for him to make out shapes at the tree line. 3 riders, unmoving, watching the cabin like wolves waiting for the right moment to strike. Jonas's jaw clenched. He'd expected them to come at daylight, maybe try intimidation first. But men like Mason Crow didn't waste time with theatrics when they believed their prey was cornered. He stepped back from the window, controlled, calm, cold. They had found her. Evelyn stirred, sensing something wrong before he spoke. She pushed up on her elbows, hair falling messily over her shoulders. Jonas, what is it? His voice was steady, but his eyes held the truth she feared. They're here. Her breath collapsed inward, and for a moment, she looked like the girl who'd collapsed at the saloon door. Broken, hunted, exhausted. But then something changed. Her fingers curled into the blankets, not in fear, but in a trembling kind of resolve. I won't go back, she whispered. I can't. Jonas moved closer, crouching so they were eye to eye. You won't. Not while I'm breathing. A soft, shaking exhale escaped her, and she nodded. That was all he needed. He handed her a small lantern. Keep it dim. Stay away from the windows. No matter what happens, you don't open that door unless I tell you. Her voice quivered. Jonas, don't kill yourself for me. He paused, then lifted her chin gently, not touching skin, just guiding her gaze upward. For the first time in years, he said quietly, I have a reason to stand between danger and something worth protecting. Don't take that from me. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't argue. Jonas grabbed his coat, his rifle, and stepped outside. The cold night wrapped around him instantly, but it didn't slow his stride. The riders hadn't moved. They waited, confident, smirking in the shadows. Jonas walked until he stood between them and the cabin door, between them and Evelyn. Crow! He called into the dark. His voice thundered across the clearing. You want to fight? You found one. Silence followed, thick, sharp, electric. Then a slow, cruel laugh drifted across the frozen ground. The wolves had shown their teeth, and Jonas Cade showed his. Mason Crow eased his horse forward, the moonlight carving his face into something sharp and cruel. Jonas had seen men like him before, men who believed owning land meant owning people, men who mistook fear for loyalty. But Mason carried something darker, a confidence that came from never being told no. Until now. Well, Mason drawled, staring down from his saddle. If it isn't the mountain recluse come to play hero, hand her over, Cade. She's property. Always was. Jonas didn't blink. She's breathing free now. That ends tonight, because of you or in spite of you. Behind Mason, the two riders shifted uneasily. They'd heard stories about Jonas Cade, the man who once faced down a grizzly with nothing but a broken blade, the tracker who could move through a forest like smoke, the veteran of a border war who had walked away because killing had come too easily. Mason, arrogant and drunk on power, assumed the tales were exaggerated. They weren't. You think I won't shoot you where you stand? Mason spat. Jonas stepped forward, rifle lowered but ready. You try, and you'll see how fast the world forgets your name. A beat passed, long, heavy, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then Mason grinned. Boys! Both riders lifted their rifles. Jonas moved first. His shot split the night like thunder, knocking the closest rider clean off his horse. The second fired wildly, missing in panic as Jonas sprinted toward him, using the dark to his advantage, closing distance in seconds. He tackled the man straight from the saddle, both crashing into the snow with a grunt. Jonas disarmed him in one violent motion, then slammed the barrel of the rifle against his jaw, leaving him unconscious. Only Mason remained. For the first time, fear cracked through his bravado. You're going to regret this, Mason snarled, fumbling for his revolver. Jonas didn't wait. He strode forward, kicking the gun away, ripping him down from the horse, slamming him into the dirt with a force that silenced every night creature for a mile. Mason writhed, furious and humiliated. You don't understand, he hissed. Women like her don't get to run. They belong where? Jonas's fist cut the sentence short. Blood darkened Mason's lip. No one belongs to you, Jonas said, voice low and lethal. Not anymore. Mason lunged, but Jonas pinned him effortlessly, years of survival and warfare guiding every controlled movement. When Mason finally went still, gasping like a trapped animal, Jonas grabbed the rope from his saddle and bound the man's hands. You're done, Jonas said simply. A weak voice floated from the cabin porch. Jonas! Evelyn stood in the doorway, lantern trembling in her hands, eyes wide not with fear, but relief. Jonas walked to her slowly, making sure she saw he wasn't hurt. It's over, he said. She let out a breath that seemed to empty months of terror from her chest. I thought you might. Not tonight, he answered softly. Evelyn's shoulders collapsed as she stepped closer, not touching him, but standing near enough that warmth passed between them. What happens now? She whispered. Jonas glanced at the bound man on the ground, then at the long stretch of mountains behind them. Now, he said, we build something that's finally ours, far from him, far from anyone who thinks your fear was ever theirs to claim. Her eyes shone, not with tears, but with something stronger, hope. And for the first time since the night she collapsed at the saloon door, Evelyn believed she might actually survive the world that tried to break her. Because Jonas Cade had chosen to stand, and he wasn't stepping back.